Welcome to Mr. Horror, your source for bone-chilling true scary Craigslist horror stories. In this compilation, we've gathered the most terrifying tales of deception, danger, and horror from around the web. Get ready for a wild ride through the darkest corners of the internet. Jenna had just moved to the city and was in desperate need of some furniture for her new apartment. Being on a tight budget, she turned to Craigslist to find some second-hand pieces. After scrolling through countless listings, she stumbled upon one that caught her eye. It was a beautiful antique dresser that would be perfect for her bedroom. The price was a steal, and the seller lived just a few blocks away. Jenna quickly arranged to meet the seller that same evening. As she walked to the address, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The street was dark and deserted, with no one else around. She felt a chill run down her spine as she approached the old, run-down apartment building. Jenna knocked on the door, and after a few moments, a man in his mid-40s answered. He was tall and thin, with a greasy comb-over and a crooked smile. Jenna felt uneasy around him but tried to push the feeling aside as she inspected the dresser. As she ran her hand over the smooth wood, she noticed something odd. One of the drawers had a strange, musty smell. She tried to ignore it, but the smell grew stronger the more she looked at it. The man noticed her discomfort and quickly assured her that it was just a little mold and that it would go away with some cleaning. Jenna reluctantly agreed to buy the dresser, but as she walked back to her apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She felt like she was being watched and kept turning around to see if anyone was following her. When she finally made it back to her apartment, she quickly locked the door behind her and collapsed onto her couch. She was exhausted and felt like she had made a mistake in buying the dresser. But it was too late now, she thought to herself, and decided to go to bed early to try and forget about the whole ordeal. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of her nightmare. As Jenna lay in bed, she tried to ignore the strange noises coming from the direction of the dresser. It sounded like someone was scratching on the wood, but when she got up to investigate, there was nothing there. Over the next few days, Jenna began to experience even more unsettling events. The dresser drawers would open on their own, revealing strange objects that she didn't remember putting there. She would hear whispers and footsteps in her apartment, even though no one else was there. And worst of all, she began to have terrifying nightmares that left her feeling drained and afraid. Jenna knew that something was seriously wrong with the dresser, but she couldn't bring herself to get rid of it. It was like it had a hold on her, and she couldn't escape its grip. One day, Jenna came home from work to find that her apartment had been ransacked. The dresser had been completely emptied, and all of her other belongings were scattered around the room. It was clear that someone had been searching for something, but she couldn't figure out what. As she sifted through the mess, Jenna found a piece of paper with a strange symbol on it. It looked like something out of a horror movie, and she felt a deep sense of dread wash over her. Jenna knew that she had to get rid of the dresser before it was too late. But as she tried to move it out of her apartment, she found that it was too heavy to lift. It was like it was rooted to the floor, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't budge it. Jenna was trapped in a nightmare of her own making, and she knew that she had to find a way to break free before it was too late. Days turned into weeks, and Jenna was unable to escape the grip of the cursed dresser. She had tried everything she could think of to get rid of it, but it seemed like it was indestructible. The strange occurrences continued to happen, and Jenna felt like she was losing her mind. One night, as Jenna lay in bed, she heard a faint scratching sound coming from the direction of the dresser. She tried to ignore it, but it grew louder and more persistent. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore and got up to investigate. As she approached the dresser, she saw that the scratches were forming a pattern. It was the same symbol that she had seen on the piece of paper that she had found when her apartment had been ransacked. Jenna knew that this was her chance to break the curse. She had to destroy the dresser and the symbol that was etched into it. With all of her strength, she grabbed a hammer and started to smash the dresser to pieces. The wood splintered and cracked under the force of her blows until there was nothing left but rubble. As the dust settled, Jenna felt a sense of relief wash over her. The curse had been broken, and she was finally free. She knew that she would never be able to explain what had happened to her, but she was grateful to be alive. From that day on, Jenna swore that she would never again use Craigslist to buy anything. She knew that there were too many dangers lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce on unsuspecting victims. And although she would never forget the terror that she had experienced, she was glad that she had found the strength to overcome it. I had been searching for a job for months, and I was getting desperate. I had bills piling up and no income coming in, so when I saw an ad on Craigslist for a marketing position, I jumped at the opportunity. The ad seemed legitimate, with a company name and contact information listed. I sent in my resume, and a few days later, I received an email asking me to come in for an interview. I was excited, but also nervous. I had never heard of the company before, and I didn't know anything about the person who was interviewing me. When I arrived at the address that was listed in the email, I was surprised to find that it was a rundown office building in a seedy part of town. But I didn't let that deter me. I was determined to land this job, no matter what. I walked into the building and was met by a woman who introduced herself as the interviewer. She seemed friendly enough, but there was something off about her. She was overly eager and her smile seemed forced. But I pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the interview. It seemed to be going well, and I was hopeful that I might finally have found a job. That's when things took a dark turn. The woman suddenly stopped asking me questions about my experience and started asking me personal questions. She wanted to know about my relationship status, my family, and even my political beliefs. I was taken aback, but I tried to answer her questions as honestly as I could. But as the interview went on, I began to feel increasingly uncomfortable. There was something not right about this woman, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was. But then she said something that sent chills down my spine. She told me that if I wanted the job, I would have to go through a trial period where I would be asked to do tasks that were not related to the job at all. I didn't know what to say. I had never heard of anything like this before, and it seemed like a red flag. But I was so desperate for a job that I didn't want to walk away without at least giving it a chance. So I agreed to the trial period, not knowing what it would entail or what I was getting myself into, but I soon found out that it was much more than I could have ever imagined. The trial period started the next day, and I was told to come to the same office building. When I arrived, the woman who had interviewed me was nowhere to be found. Instead, I was greeted by a man who introduced himself as the supervisor. He was friendly enough, but there was something off about him, too. He seemed to be constantly watching me, as if he was waiting for me to slip up. The first task he gave me was simple enough. He asked me to make copies of some documents. But as the day went on, the tasks became increasingly bizarre. He asked me to sort a pile of buttons by color, and then to arrange them into patterns. He asked me to make a list of all the songs I knew by heart and then to sing them for him. He even asked me to take a personality test, which seemed more like a quiz from a teen magazine than a legitimate test. I started to feel uneasy. What did any of these tasks have to do with marketing? And why was I being asked to do them? But I soldiered on, determined to make it through the trial period and get the job. I told myself that maybe these tasks were just a way to test my attention to detail or my creativity. But as the days went on, things got even weirder. The supervisor started to make strange comments, like how good I looked in my skirt or how he could tell I was a fun person. I tried to ignore him, but his comments made me increasingly uncomfortable. And then things took a really dark turn. One day, he asked me to come into his office and sit down. He told me that he had a special task for me, one that was very important for the company. But before he could explain what it was, he leaned in and kissed me on the lips. I was shocked and horrified. I tried to pull away, but he held me there, kissing me harder and harder. Finally, I managed to break free and run out of the office. I never went back, and I never heard from the company again. It was a terrifying experience, one that left me feeling violated and vulnerable. But it was also a lesson, a reminder that not everything on Craigslist is what it seems, and that we need to be cautious when dealing with strangers online. The experience with the shady Craigslist job interview and the disturbing trial period had left me feeling scared and disillusioned. I didn't know who to trust anymore, and I was starting to lose hope in finding a job. But with the help of my family and friends, I slowly started to pick myself up and move forward. I reported the incident to the police, and they were able to track down the company and the supervisor. It turned out that they had been running a human trafficking ring under the guise of a marketing company. They had been using Craigslist to lure unsuspecting victims, just like me, into their trap. I was lucky to have escaped, but I knew that there were countless others who had not been so fortunate. It broke my heart to think of all the people who had fallen prey to their schemes. But instead of letting the experience defeat me, I decided to use it as fuel for change. I started to volunteer at organizations that helped victims of human trafficking and other online scams. I also started to speak out about my experience, sharing my story with others and raising awareness about the dangers of Craigslist and other online platforms. It wasn't easy. There were times when I felt scared and alone, when I wondered if I was making a difference at all. But then I would receive messages from people who had read my story and had been inspired to be more cautious, to be more aware of the dangers that were out there. And that's when I knew that I was making a difference. Even if it was just one person at a time, even if it was just a small ripple in a big pond, I was making a difference. In the end, the experience had changed me in ways that I could never have imagined. It had shown me the worst of humanity, but it had also shown me the best, the compassion and strength of those who were fighting to make a difference. And it had taught me a valuable lesson, that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. There is always a way forward, even if it's not the path we had planned. We just have to keep moving forward, one step at a time, and never give up. It was a damp and dreary October night when Emily, a curious college student, stumbled upon an interesting Craigslist ad. The ad was for a vintage doll collection, which Emily thought would make a perfect addition to her creepy Halloween decorations. After exchanging a few emails with the seller, she decided to visit the address provided to examine the dolls in person. Emily's roommate, Sarah, had a bad feeling about this, but Emily dismissed her concerns, assuring her that she'd be cautious. The address led her to an old, run-down house on the outskirts of town. Tall trees and thick undergrowth surrounded the house, providing an eerie, isolated atmosphere. The front door creaked open as Emily hesitantly approached, and she stepped inside. The interior of the house was dimly lit and filled with the musty smell of old wood and decay. She called out, announcing her arrival, but received no response. Unsure of where to go, she began to explore the house. In the living room, she found a display case filled with dolls. They were dressed in tattered Victorian-era clothing, their glass eyes staring blankly back at her. Emily felt uneasy, but she couldn't help but be captivated by the dolls. As she examined them more closely, she discovered a note tucked away in the corner of the display case. The note was written in a shaky hand, and it read, "Dear buyer, I hope these dolls bring you as much joy as they have brought me. However, I must warn you, they have a history. They once belonged to a woman who practiced dark arts and used them in her rituals. Please be careful, for they may still possess a sinister energy. Sincerely, the seller." Emily felt a chill run down her spine, but she couldn't resist the temptation of owning such unique and creepy dolls. She decided to take the risk and emailed the seller, offering to buy the entire collection. The seller agreed, but warned her to handle the dolls with care. As Emily brought the dolls back to her apartment, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She felt a malevolent presence lingering, but she brushed it off as her imagination running wild. Little did she know that she had just invited a sinister force into her life, one that would soon put her and Sarah in grave danger. The following days were filled with strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, unexplained noises, and the feeling of being constantly watched. Emily and Sarah began to argue, tensions rising as they accused each other of playing pranks. But deep down, they both knew that something wasn't right, and that the dolls were at the center of it all. As the days turned into weeks, the paranormal activity escalated, culminating in a terrifying encounter that would change their lives forever. In the midst of the unsettling incidents, Emily and Sarah decided to seek help from a local psychic named Madame Leclerc. The psychic agreed to visit their apartment to assess the energy surrounding the dolls. As soon as Madame Leclerc entered their home, she felt an overwhelming sense of darkness and dread. She insisted on conducting a seance to communicate with any spirits that might be connected to the dolls. As they gathered around a table, candles flickering in the dimly lit room, Madame Leclerc began to chant. The atmosphere in the room grew colder, and the doll's glass eyes seemed to come alive with a malicious glint. Suddenly, a disembodied voice echoed through the room, causing the candles to flicker violently. The voice introduced itself as the spirit of the woman who had once owned the dolls, a powerful witch named Agatha Blackwood. Agatha revealed that she had cursed the dolls to contain the spirits of her enemies, trapping them in a tortured existence for all eternity. She had hoped that the dolls would be lost forever, but Emily's curiosity had unwittingly unleashed the vengeful spirits upon herself and Sarah. Agatha's spirit, still bound to the dolls, sought to reclaim her dark power and exact her revenge upon the living. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Emily, Sarah, and Madame Leclerc devised a plan to lift the curse and free the trapped spirits. They needed to find a way to return the dolls to Agatha's burial site, where her body and the remnants of her power still resided. To locate the burial site, Madame Leclerc suggested they delve into local archives and historical records. The research led them to an abandoned cemetery deep in the heart of the woods. With trepidation, they ventured into the dark forest, armed with the cursed dolls and a ritual that Madame Leclerc believed would sever the link between Agatha and her victims. As they made their way through the twisted trees, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed, the spectral gaze of Agatha Blackwood bearing down on them. At last, they arrived at the cemetery, where they found Agatha's grave marked by a decrepit tombstone. The wind howled around them as they prepared the ritual, and the dolls seemed to twitch and squirm with a newfound vigor. Madame Leclerc instructed Emily and Sarah to place the dolls around the grave, forming a circle. As they did so, the earth beneath their feet began to tremble, and the air crackled with energy. Madame Leclerc initiated the ritual, chanting ancient words that seemed to pierce the veil between the living and the dead. The dolls convulsed, their glass eyes shattering as the trapped spirits within were finally released. But they were not yet safe. Agatha's spirit, furious at the prospect of losing her power, manifested before them, a terrifying specter bathed in shadow. As the vengeful spirit of Agatha Blackwood bore down on them, Emily, Sarah, and Madame Leclerc faced the ultimate test of their courage and determination. With their lives hanging in the balance, they would have to confront the darkness head-on and sever the connection between Agatha and her cursed dolls once and for all. With Agatha's spirit looming before them, Emily, Sarah, and Madame Leclerc stood their ground, determined to end the curse that had plagued them. The air was thick with tension as they prepared for the final confrontation. Madame Leclerc, drawing upon her years of experience, instructed Emily and Sarah to join hands and focus their energy on Agatha's spirit. Together, they formed a circle of protection, shielding themselves from the malevolent force. As they did so, Madame Leclerc began to recite an incantation that would banish Agatha's spirit back to the grave. Agatha, enraged by their defiance, unleashed a torrent of dark energy, attempting to break the circle and reclaim her power. But Emily and Sarah, empowered by their friendship and the desire to end the nightmare, held firm, their connection growing stronger with each passing moment. As Madame Leclerc continued the incantation, the dolls that once housed the trapped spirits began to crumble, their porcelain forms reduced to dust. Agatha's spirit wailed in anguish, her connection to the mortal realm weakening with each word spoken by the psychic. Finally, with a deafening scream, Agatha's spirit was dragged back into the depths of the earth, her dark power dissipating into the night. The ground beneath the grave settled, and the wind died down, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The curse had been broken. Exhausted but triumphant, Emily, Sarah, and Madame Leclerc returned to the apartment, leaving the haunted dolls and the nightmare they had unleashed behind them. The sinister presence that had once permeated their lives was gone, replaced by a newfound sense of peace and security. As the weeks passed, life returned to normal for Emily and Sarah. They became closer than ever, their bond strengthened by the ordeal they had faced together. The experience had taught them the importance of trust, courage, and the power of friendship. One day, while cleaning out their closets, Emily came across a newspaper article detailing the mysterious disappearance of a young woman who had gone to purchase a collection of vintage dolls. The chilling story served as a stark reminder of the dark forces that had nearly claimed their lives. The girls knew that they could never forget the terrifying events that had transpired, but they also knew that they had emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. They were no longer just roommates, they were survivors, bound together by the shared experience of a horror they had conquered. As Emily and Sarah moved forward with their lives, they would always remember the chilling tale of Agatha Blackwood and her sinister collection of cursed dolls. They vowed to never again seek out the unknown or indulge their curiosity in the supernatural, for they had learned that some secrets are best left buried in the shadows of the past. Mike was a father of 2 young boys and loved to buy and sell iPhones for a little extra income. He would scour Craigslist for deals, snatch up phones for cheap, and then flip them for a profit. One day, he came across a listing for an iPhone X that was priced way lower than it should be. Mike couldn't believe his luck and quickly arranged to meet the seller in a parking lot near his home. As he arrived at the meeting spot, he noticed a man standing near a car, holding the iPhone. Mike approached him and they quickly struck a deal. The man seemed normal enough, and Mike didn't think much of it when he left with the phone. But as he drove away, he began to feel a creeping sense of unease. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right with him, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. When he got home and examined the phone, he realized that it was completely fake. The screen was made of plastic, and the insides were just a jumble of wires and cheap parts. Mike felt angry and ripped off, but he also felt a sense of fear. Who was this man, and why did he have a fake iPhone? As the days went by, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He noticed a strange car parked on his street that seemed to be there all the time. And whenever he went out to buy or sell phones, he felt like someone was following him. Mike tried to convince himself that he was just being paranoid, but then he started receiving strange messages from unknown numbers. The messages would be nonsensical, but they always seemed to be watching him, knowing his every move. Mike realized that he had stumbled into something much more sinister than a simple phone scam. And he knew that he needed to figure out who was behind it before it was too late. Mike became obsessed with finding out who was behind the fake iPhone scam and the strange messages he was receiving. He spent hours scrolling through Craigslist, trying to match the phone number of the seller with any other listings or messages he had received. As he dug deeper, he began to uncover a network of fake sellers and buyers who seemed to be working together to target unsuspecting victims like him. They would use fake names and burner phones to communicate, and always insisted on meeting in secluded areas or at odd hours of the day. Mike knew that he needed to put a stop to their operation before they could hurt anyone else. He contacted the local police and provided them with all the information he had gathered, hoping that they could track down the scammers. But as he waited for the police to act, Mike's fears continued to escalate. He started having nightmares about being followed and attacked by the scammers, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were closing in on him. One day, Mike received a call from an unknown number. When he answered, he heard nothing but heavy breathing on the other end. He quickly hung up, but the call left him shaken. It was clear that the scammers knew he was onto them, and they weren't going to let him go without a fight. Mike knew that he had to be careful and watch his back, but he also knew that he couldn't let them win. Determined to put an end to the scam once and for all, Mike continued to work with the police to track down the scammers. It was a long and difficult process, but eventually they were able to make several arrests and shut down the operation. Mike was relieved that the scammers were finally behind bars, but he knew that the experience had changed him forever. He realized that the world could be a dangerous place and that sometimes even the simplest of transactions could lead to unexpected and terrifying consequences. From then on, Mike was much more cautious when buying and selling phones online. He also made sure to always meet in public places and never give out personal information to strangers. But despite his newfound caution, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The experience had left him with a lingering sense of paranoia and fear. One day, several months after the scam had been shut down, Mike was walking to his car after work when he heard someone call out his name. He turned around and saw a man standing a few feet away, watching him intently. Mike didn't recognize the man, but something about him seemed familiar. The man took a step forward, and Mike felt his heart racing. But then the man spoke. "Hey, are you the guy who helped bust that iPhone scam a while back?" he asked. Mike felt a wave of relief wash over him. It was just a stranger thanking him for his help. But as he drove home, he couldn't help but wonder, what if it wasn't just a coincidence that the man knew who he was? What if the scammers were still out there, watching him, waiting for their chance to strike again? Mike tried to push the thought out of his mind, but he knew that he would never be able to forget the fear and uncertainty that the Craigslist scam had brought into his life. It was a sweltering August evening when Jake, a recent college graduate, began his search for a new roommate. He had just moved to a new city for his first post-grad job, and he needed someone to help share the rent for his 2-bedroom apartment. After asking around and failing to find any suitable candidates, he turned to Craigslist to post an ad. Within hours, he received several responses, but one in particular caught his attention. The respondent, named Alex, seemed like the perfect fit, a young professional with a steady job and a quiet demeanor. After exchanging a few emails and conducting a brief video call, Jake decided to offer Alex the room. When Alex moved in, everything seemed to be going smoothly. They got along well, shared the chores, and maintained a respectful living situation. However, as the weeks passed, Jake began to notice some odd behavior from his new roommate. At first, it was small things like Alex's insistence on keeping his bedroom door locked at all times or his habit of whispering to himself late at night. But as time went on, the peculiarities escalated. Alex developed a fixation on collecting antique medical instruments, filling their living room with rusted scalpels, bone saws, and other unsettling relics. One night, after coming home from a late shift, Jake found Alex sitting in the dark, surrounded by his macabre collection. The sight was unnerving, but Jake tried to brush it off as a harmless, albeit strange, hobby. However, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more sinister going on, especially when he began to find disturbing items among Alex's belongings. One day, while searching for a missing phone charger, Jake discovered a box hidden beneath Alex's bed. Inside, he found a collection of newspaper clippings detailing a series of unsolved murders that had occurred over the past several months. Each article described a chilling scene. The victims were found with precise, surgical cuts, their bodies carefully arranged in a disturbing display. As Jake read through the articles, he couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. The murders had begun around the same time Alex had moved in. Terrified, Jake tried to convince himself that it was merely a coincidence and that Alex was just fascinated with the morbid stories. However, he couldn't ignore the nagging sense of dread that had settled in the pit of his stomach. As the days went on, Jake became increasingly paranoid, constantly questioning the true nature of his roommate. He struggled with the decision to confront Alex or to seek help, but he knew he couldn't ignore his suspicions any longer. What he didn't realize was that his search for the truth would lead him down a dark and dangerous path, forcing him to confront a nightmare he never could have imagined. Jake's paranoia grew with each passing day, making it difficult for him to focus on work or maintain a sense of normalcy. He decided to confide in his close friend, Laura, who was equal parts concerned and skeptical about his suspicions. After much deliberation, they agreed that Jake should try to gather more evidence before taking any drastic actions. Over the next few weeks, Jake began to discreetly monitor Alex's movements and activities, hoping to find proof that would either confirm or dispel his fears. He noticed that Alex often left the apartment late at night and didn't return until the early hours of the morning. When confronted about his nocturnal excursions, Alex claimed to be a night owl who enjoyed long walks to clear his mind. Despite his unsettling discoveries, Jake still lacked concrete evidence to connect Alex to the gruesome murders. However, his investigation took a harrowing turn when he stumbled upon a hidden room in their apartment. While searching for a misplaced document, Jake found a concealed door behind a bookshelf in Alex's room. With a racing heart and trembling hands, he pushed open the door to reveal a small, dimly lit chamber. The walls were lined with more antique medical instruments, and a large, old wooden table stood in the center of the room, covered in dried bloodstains. Horrified, Jake realized that he had uncovered Alex's macabre workshop, a place where his twisted fantasies were brought to life. As the gravity of the situation sank in, Jake knew he had to act quickly. He took photos of the secret room and brought them to Laura, who immediately urged him to contact the authorities. Together, they went to the police, presenting the photos and recounting the disturbing events that had transpired since Alex moved in. The police, taking the matter seriously, agreed to investigate Alex and advised Jake to maintain his distance from his roommate in the meantime. As the investigation unfolded, the police discovered that Alex had a dark and troubled past. His fascination with antique medical instruments and the macabre had begun at a young age, fueled by a tumultuous home life and a deep-seated obsession with power and control. The police continued to build their case against Alex, but with each passing day, Jake grew more anxious. He feared that Alex would somehow discover his involvement in the investigation and seek retribution. Unbeknownst to him, his worst fears were about to come true. One fateful night, Alex confronted Jake in their apartment, revealing that he had discovered the police investigation. His eyes burned with rage as he accused Jake of betrayal, claiming that he had trusted him as a friend and a confidant. Jake, paralyzed with fear, realized that he was trapped in the apartment with a dangerous killer, a man who had nothing left to lose. As Jake faced the reality of his dire situation, he knew he would have to summon every ounce of courage and ingenuity to escape the deadly grasp of his twisted roommate. With Alex's rage-filled eyes locked onto him, Jake's mind raced, desperately searching for a way to defuse the situation. He feigned sympathy, telling Alex that he never meant to betray him and that he only wanted to help. To his surprise, this seemed to momentarily calm Alex down, giving Jake the precious seconds he needed to devise an escape plan. While maintaining a calm demeanor, Jake inched closer to the front door, claiming he wanted to sit down and discuss everything with Alex. As he neared the door, he prepared himself to make a break for it, knowing that he might not get another opportunity. Suddenly, Jake lunged for the door and flung it open, sprinting into the dimly lit hallway. He could hear Alex's enraged shouts and pounding footsteps behind him as he raced towards the stairwell. Heart pounding and legs burning, Jake managed to make it outside the building, where he frantically dialed 911. Police arrived on the scene within minutes, swarming the apartment complex in search of Alex. Jake, still shaken by the harrowing encounter, provided them with a detailed description of his roommate and his last known whereabouts. After an intense search, the police found Alex hiding in a nearby alley, clutching a rusted scalpel in his hand. He was arrested and taken into custody, where he was later charged with multiple counts of murder, linking him to the gruesome crimes Jake had discovered in the newspaper clippings. With Alex behind bars, the weight of fear and paranoia finally lifted from Jake's shoulders. He was hailed as a local hero for his role in unmasking the dangerous killer, but he couldn't shake the lingering trauma of his close encounter with evil. Determined to put the nightmare behind him, Jake moved out of the apartment and found a new place to live. He was cautious about finding a new roommate, opting to live alone for the time being. As he unpacked his belongings in his new home, he found a small box that he didn't recognize. With trepidation, he opened it, only to find a note from Laura. It read, "You survived something terrifying, and I know it won't be easy to forget. But remember, you're stronger than you think, and you have friends who care about you. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm just a phone call away." Jake smiled, realizing that despite the horrors he had faced, he had emerged stronger and more resilient. He was grateful for the support of friends like Laura, who had stood by his side throughout the ordeal. As he settled into his new life, Jake vowed never to forget the lessons he had learned during his time with Alex. He knew that evil could lurk behind the most unsuspecting faces, and that trust and intuition were invaluable tools in the face of danger. The chilling tale of the Craigslist roommate would remain etched in his memory forever, a stark reminder of the darkness that sometimes hides in plain sight. I had just graduated from college and was looking for a cheap place to live while I figured out my next steps. That's when I saw an ad on Craigslist for a room in a shared apartment. The ad seemed perfect, the rent was cheap, the location was great, and the person who posted the ad seemed friendly and outgoing. We exchanged a few messages, and I decided to go see the apartment in person. When I arrived, I was greeted by the person who posted the ad, a woman in her late 20s with long, dark hair and a warm smile. She showed me around the apartment, and I was impressed by how clean and organized everything was. We talked for a while, and I felt like we had a lot in common. She seemed like a great roommate, and I was excited at the prospect of living with her. So I agreed to move in. We signed a lease, and I moved my things into the apartment a few days later. The first few weeks were great. My roommate and I got along well, and we spent our evenings watching movies and cooking dinner together. But then things started to take a strange turn. My roommate would disappear for hours at a time, sometimes without any explanation. She would come back late at night, looking disheveled and tired. I started to feel uneasy. I didn't know where she was going or who she was spending time with. And then one day, I came home early from work to find her in the living room with a strange man. He was older, with greasy hair and a scruffy beard. He seemed agitated, and I could tell that something was off about him. My roommate introduced him as a friend, but I could tell that she was nervous around him. I tried to be polite, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was not right. As the weeks went on, things only got worse. The strange man started showing up more and more often, and I started to feel like I was living in a dangerous situation. I tried to talk to my roommate about it, but she brushed me off. She said that he was just a friend and that I was overreacting. But then one night, I came home to find my roommate and the strange man arguing in the living room. They were shouting at each other, and I could tell that things were about to turn violent. I tried to intervene, but the man pushed me aside and grabbed my roommate by the arm. He started dragging her toward the door, and I knew that I had to do something. I called the police, and they arrived just in time to stop the man from taking my roommate away. It turned out that he was a dangerous criminal who had been using my roommate as a pawn in his schemes. I was shaken, but I was also grateful. Grateful that I had trusted my instincts and called for help. Grateful that I had gotten my roommate out of a dangerous situation. But I was also terrified. I realized that I had no idea who my roommate really was, and that I had put myself in a dangerous situation by living with her. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that not everything on Craigslist is what it seems, and that we need to be cautious when dealing with strangers online. After the incident with the strange man, I knew that I couldn't continue living with my roommate. It was just too dangerous, and I didn't want to put myself in harm's way. But I also knew that I couldn't just walk away without finding out more about my roommate's past. I needed to know who she really was and what she had been involved in. So I started to do some digging. I looked up her name online and found some disturbing information. She had a criminal record, including charges for fraud and theft. She had also been involved with a known gang in the past. I was shocked. I had no idea that my roommate had such a shady past. It made sense, though, the disappearing acts, the strange man, the sense of danger that had been hanging over us since I moved in. But I needed to know more. I started to ask around, talking to people who had known my roommate in the past. I found out that she had a history of getting involved with dangerous men, and that she had a pattern of putting herself in risky situations. I also found out that she had been involved in some shady deals, including one involving fake IDs and passports. It seemed like she was involved in some kind of criminal activity, and I didn't want to be caught up in it. But as I dug deeper, I started to receive threats. Someone had found out that I was asking questions, and they didn't want me to find out any more information. I was scared, but I didn't want to give up. I knew that I needed to get to the bottom of things, no matter what the cost. That's when I received a call from the police. They had been investigating my roommate, too, and they had found out some disturbing information. It turned out that she had been involved in a major criminal organization, one that was involved in drugs, weapons, and human trafficking. She had been using Craigslist to recruit unsuspecting victims, just like me, into their web of lies. The police asked me to testify against her to help them bring her to justice. I was scared, but I knew that it was the right thing to do. So I testified in court, and my roommate was convicted of multiple charges. She was sentenced to prison, and I never saw her again. It was a terrifying experience, one that had left me shaken and scared. But it was also a lesson, a reminder that we need to be cautious when dealing with strangers online, and that we never know who we might be living with. I moved on from the experience, but I never forgot it. It had changed me in ways that I could never have imagined, and it had taught me to trust my instincts and be cautious when dealing with strangers. After the incident with my dangerous roommate, I felt like my world had been turned upside down. I had trusted someone who had turned out to be a criminal, and I had put myself in danger by living with her. But I also felt grateful that I had gotten out of the situation alive, and grateful that I had been able to help the police bring her to justice. In the weeks and months that followed, I focused on moving on. I found a new apartment, one that was in a safer neighborhood and with roommates who were trustworthy and kind. I also started to focus on my career, applying for jobs and going on interviews. It wasn't easy, but I knew that I had to keep moving forward and not let the experience define me. And then, one day, I received an unexpected message on LinkedIn. It was from a woman who had read about my experience with my dangerous roommate online. She told me that she had gone through a similar experience and that reading about my story had helped her feel less alone. We started talking, and we realized that we had a lot in common. We had both been lured into dangerous situations by people we had met online, and we had both managed to get out alive. We decided to start a support group, a place where people could come together to share their stories and find solace in each other's experiences. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. The support group grew, and we helped countless people who had been through similar experiences. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. There is always a way forward, even if it's not the path we had planned. We just have to keep moving forward, one step at a time, and never give up. And for me, that meant using my experience to help others. It meant turning a negative into a positive and using my story to make a difference in the world. It was a typical Saturday morning when Sarah decided to browse through Craigslist for some affordable furniture. She had recently moved into a new apartment and needed to furnish it on a budget. As she scrolled through the ads, she stumbled upon a post that caught her attention, a beautiful antique dresser for a fraction of its retail price. Without hesitation, Sarah reached out to the seller and arranged to meet him that afternoon at his house. The seller's name was Tom, and he seemed friendly and accommodating over the phone. He gave her his address and promised to have the dresser ready for her to pick up. When Sarah arrived at Tom's house, she was struck by how rundown and isolated it looked. The yard was overgrown with weeds, and the paint on the house was chipped and faded. But she brushed it off, thinking that Tom was probably just an eccentric antique collector. Tom greeted her at the door, and Sarah was immediately taken aback by his appearance. He was tall and thin, with a gaunt face and sunken eyes. He seemed nervous and fidgety as he led her to the back of the house where the dresser was stored. As Sarah inspected the dresser, Tom's behavior became increasingly strange. He kept staring at her intently, and his breathing grew heavier. Sarah tried to ignore it and focused on examining the piece of furniture. But when she leaned in to get a closer look, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She spun around to see Tom standing behind her, his face inches away from hers. His eyes were wild and manic, and his grip on her shoulder was tight. Sarah tried to pull away, but he only tightened his grip. "You're not leaving," he hissed. "You're staying with me forever." Sarah's heart raced as she struggled to break free from Tom's grip. She kicked and screamed, but he was too strong for her. She knew she had to think fast if she wanted to survive. In a moment of desperation, Sarah reached for the first thing she could find, a vase on a nearby table. She smashed it over Tom's head, causing him to stagger back in pain. Sarah seized the opportunity to make a run for it. She sprinted through the house, searching for an escape route, but every door and window was locked or boarded up. She could hear Tom's footsteps closing in on her, and she knew she was running out of time. Finally, she stumbled upon a small trapdoor in the floor. With no other options left, she lifted it up and crawled inside. The space was cramped and dusty, but it was her only chance. She huddled in the corner and held her breath as she heard Tom's footsteps getting closer and closer. For what felt like hours, Sarah waited in the dark, suffocating space. She could hear Tom searching for her, muttering to himself about how he would never let her go. But eventually, the footsteps faded away, and Sarah knew she was safe, at least for now. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone and dialed 911. She told them everything that had happened and gave them Tom's address. Within minutes, the police arrived and apprehended Tom. Sarah was traumatized by the experience and never bought anything off Craigslist again. But she was grateful to be alive and vowed to never take her safety for granted again. Tom was charged with attempted kidnapping and assault, and he was eventually sentenced to life in prison. Sarah attended the trial, wanting to see justice served for what he had put her through. Although she had survived the terrifying ordeal, Sarah couldn't shake off the feeling of vulnerability and fear that had been instilled in her. She started attending therapy sessions to deal with the trauma and worked on rebuilding her life. Over time, Sarah found solace in her friends and family who had supported her through her darkest moments. She also became an advocate for safety awareness, warning others about the dangers of buying and selling items online. As the years passed, Sarah eventually moved on from the experience, but it remained a part of her story. She never forgot the fear and the desperation she felt that day, and it served as a constant reminder to stay vigilant and never take her safety for granted. The Craigslist incident became a cautionary tale in her community, and Sarah hoped that others would learn from her experience and stay safe when making online transactions. Despite the trauma, she found strength in knowing that she had survived and that her story could help others avoid similar situations. It was a typical Saturday night, and Emily was bored out of her mind. She had already binge-watched every show on Netflix and couldn't find anything interesting to do. That's when she remembered Craigslist, the website that promised endless possibilities. As she scrolled through the site, she stumbled upon a job posting that caught her attention. House-sitting opportunity for a wealthy couple going out of town for the weekend. It seemed like an easy way to make some quick cash, so Emily quickly applied. The following day, she received a call from the couple, who were delighted to have her as their house sitter. Emily couldn't believe her luck. It was a beautiful mansion located on the outskirts of the city, and they were offering her a significant amount of money for the weekend. She eagerly accepted the offer and set off to the mansion. As she pulled up to the house, Emily couldn't help but feel uneasy. The mansion was isolated and located deep in the woods, making her feel isolated from the rest of the world. The air was tense, and she could hear the leaves rustling from the trees. Emily dismissed her fears, reminding herself that she was getting paid a lot of money to do nothing but relax and watch TV. She entered the mansion, and to her surprise, it was even more beautiful than she had imagined. The rooms were spacious, the furniture was lavish, and the house was filled with expensive art pieces. As Emily began to explore the mansion, she noticed that something felt off. The atmosphere was too quiet and almost eerie. The furniture had dust accumulated, and the food in the kitchen was spoiled, indicating that the owners hadn't been around in a while. She tried to ignore the unsettling feeling that crept up on her and focused on the positive aspects of her temporary stay. As the night settled in, Emily retired to her room and snuggled up in bed with a book. She could hear the sounds of the house settling down for the night, the old wooden floors creaking and the windows rattling in the wind. It was a peaceful feeling, but something made her uneasy. Just as she was about to drift off to sleep, she heard a knock at the door. Emily sat up, confused. Who could be knocking at the door at this hour? She made her way to the front door and hesitantly peered through the peephole. A figure stood outside, dressed in black and wearing a ski mask. Emily's heart began to race, and she backed away from the door. She heard the person fiddling with the lock, trying to get inside. She could feel the terror taking over her, and she knew she had to do something quickly. Emily was frozen with fear as the intruder continued to try and break into the mansion. She couldn't call the police because she had no phone service, and the mansion was located too far from the city. She knew that she had to stay calm and find a way to protect herself. She quickly made her way to the bedroom and locked the door, barricading it with a dresser. She heard the intruder making his way through the house, opening doors and searching for something. She could hear his footsteps getting closer and closer, and her heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear herself think. She knew that if the intruder got into her room, she would be helpless. Suddenly, the intruder stopped outside her door. Emily held her breath, afraid to make a sound. The doorknob began to turn, and Emily knew she had to act quickly. She grabbed the lamp on the bedside table and prepared to defend herself. As the door swung open, Emily swung the lamp with all her might, hitting the intruder on the head. He stumbled back, and Emily seized the opportunity to escape. She ran down the hallway, hoping to find a phone or a way out of the mansion. But the intruder was fast, and he quickly caught up to her. He tackled her to the ground, and Emily could feel his hot breath on her neck. She tried to fight back, but he was too strong. He pinned her down and held a knife to her throat, threatening to kill her if she didn't cooperate. Emily was terrified, and she knew that she had to come up with a plan to escape. She tried to reason with the intruder, offering him anything he wanted if he would let her go. But he wasn't interested in negotiating. As the hours passed, Emily was subjected to torture and unspeakable horrors. The intruder revealed that he had been hired by the couple who owned the mansion to eliminate her. They had lured her in with the house-sitting job, intending to use her as a sacrifice for their twisted rituals. Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could someone be so cruel, so heartless? She begged for her life, but the intruder just laughed in her face, enjoying her terror. Emily was in a state of shock, unable to comprehend the horror that had befallen her. She had been lured into the mansion by a seemingly innocent job offer, only to find herself in the clutches of a deranged couple and their hired assassin. But despite the odds, Emily refused to give up. She knew that she had to escape, no matter what it took. She bided her time, waiting for the right moment to make her move. One night, as the couple and the intruder were distracted, Emily made a break for it. She ran through the mansion, dodging obstacles and making her way towards the front door. She could hear the sound of footsteps behind her, but she didn't look back. She knew that she had to keep going. As she reached the front door, she realized that it was locked. She searched for the key, but it was nowhere to be found. She could hear the intruder getting closer, and she knew that she was running out of time. Just as she was about to give up hope, she noticed a small window near the ceiling. It was her only chance. She grabbed a nearby chair and climbed up to the window, forcing it open. She could hear the intruder getting closer, but she didn't hesitate. She climbed out of the window, dropping to the ground below. She landed hard, but she didn't feel the pain. She was free. She ran through the woods, not stopping until she reached the nearest town. She stumbled into a gas station covered in dirt and blood and begged for help. The police were called, and they quickly made their way to the mansion. What they found inside was nothing short of a nightmare. The couple and the intruder had been performing twisted rituals in the mansion, using innocent victims like Emily as sacrifices. They had been operating under the radar for years, and no one had suspected a thing. Thanks to Emily's bravery and quick thinking, the couple and the intruder were apprehended and brought to justice. Emily went through extensive therapy to recover from her trauma, but she emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. As for the mansion, it remained empty and abandoned, a dark reminder of the horrors that had taken place within its walls. Emily never forgot what had happened to her, but she refused to let it define her. She lived her life to the fullest, always remembering to be cautious, but never letting fear control her. I was desperate for a job. I had been unemployed for months, and my savings were running low. That's when I saw an ad on Craigslist for a marketing position. The ad promised good pay and flexible hours, and it seemed like the perfect opportunity. So I sent in my resume and waited for a response. A few days later, I received an email inviting me to an interview. I was thrilled, finally, a chance to prove myself and get back on my feet. The interview was set to take place at a small office building in the downtown area. When I arrived, I was greeted by a woman who introduced herself as the supervisor. She was friendly and outgoing, and we hit it off right away. The interview went well, and I felt like I had made a good impression. The supervisor told me that I had a lot of potential, and that she would like to offer me a trial period to see if I was a good fit for the company. I was over the moon. Finally, a chance to prove myself and start making money again. But then things started to take a strange turn. The supervisor started asking me to do things that seemed odd, like making cold calls at strange hours of the night or going to strange locations to drop off packages. I tried to ask her about it, but she brushed me off. She said that it was all part of the job and that I needed to be flexible and willing to take on any task. But then one day, I received a package to deliver to a sketchy-looking motel on the outskirts of town. I started to feel uneasy. This was not what I had signed up for, but I didn't want to disappoint the supervisor, so I went to the motel and dropped off the package, and that's when things took a turn for the worse. As I was leaving the motel, I was grabbed by two men and dragged into a nearby alley. They demanded to know what was in the package, and when I told them that I didn't know, they started to get violent. I managed to fight them off and run away, but I knew that something was not right. I didn't know who to trust anymore, and I started to feel like I had gotten in over my head. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that not everything on Craigslist is what it seems, and that we need to be cautious when dealing with strangers online. After the incident at the motel, I knew that I couldn't continue working for the company. It was just too dangerous, and I didn't want to put myself in harm's way. But I also knew that I couldn't just walk away without finding out more about the company and what they were involved in. I needed to know who they really were and what they had been doing, so I started to do some digging. I looked up the company name online and found some disturbing information. There were multiple reports of fraud and illegal activity associated with the company. I also found out that the supervisor had been using Craigslist to recruit unsuspecting victims into their web of lies. They would offer them jobs that seemed too good to be true and then use them as pawns in their schemes. I was shocked. I had no idea that the company had such a shady past. It made sense, though, the odd tasks, the strange hours, the sense of danger that had been hanging over us since the beginning. But I needed to know more. I started to ask around, talking to people who had worked for the company in the past. I found out that they had been involved in some shady deals, including one involving fake IDs and passports. It seemed like they were involved in some kind of criminal activity, and I didn't want to be caught up in it. But as I dug deeper, I started to receive threats. Someone had found out that I was asking questions, and they didn't want me to find out any more information. I was scared, but I didn't want to give up. I knew that I needed to get to the bottom of things, no matter what the cost. That's when I received a call from the police. They had been investigating the company, too, and they had found out some disturbing information. It turned out that the company was a front for a major criminal organization, one that was involved in drugs, weapons, and human trafficking. They had been using Craigslist to recruit unsuspecting victims, just like me, into their web of lies. The police asked me to testify against them to help them bring the organization to justice. I was scared, but I knew that it was the right thing to do. So I testified in court, and the organization was dismantled. Many of its members were arrested, and the supervisor was sentenced to prison. It was a terrifying experience, one that had left me shaken and scared. But it was also a lesson, a reminder that we need to be cautious when dealing with strangers online, and that we never know who we might be working for. I moved on from the experience, but I never forgot it. It had changed me in ways that I could never have imagined, and it had taught me to trust my instincts and be cautious when dealing with strangers. After the incident with the criminal organization, I felt like my world had been turned upside down once again. I had trusted someone who had turned out to be a criminal, and I had put myself in danger by working for them. But I also felt grateful that I had gotten out of the situation alive, and grateful that I had been able to help the police bring them to justice. In the weeks and months that followed, I focused on moving on. I started to apply for jobs again, but this time I was more cautious. I made sure to do my research on every company before applying, and I made sure to trust my instincts. I also started to focus on my personal life. I had neglected my friends and family while I was working for the criminal organization, and I wanted to make it up to them. So I started to reach out to old friends, reconnecting and rebuilding the relationships that I had let slip away. It wasn't easy, but I knew that I had to keep moving forward and not let the experience define me. And then, one day, I received an unexpected call from the police. They wanted to thank me for my help in the investigation, and they wanted to offer me a job. It was a job as an advocate for victims of online crime, a way for me to use my experience to help others who had been through similar situations. I was overjoyed. Finally, a chance to turn a negative into a positive and to use my story to make a difference in the world. So I took the job and I started to work with victims of online crime. It wasn't easy. Many of the stories were heartbreaking and terrifying, but it was worth it. I was able to help people who had been through similar situations, to provide them with support and guidance, and to help them find a way forward. Thank you for watching this bone-chilling true scary Craigslist horror stories compilation from Mr. Horror. If you enjoyed these stories, please subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to get notified when we post new content. We know that the internet can be a dark and dangerous place, full of unspeakable horrors lurking around every corner. But by sharing these stories, we hope to raise awareness and help keep our viewers safe. If you have any true scary Craigslist horror stories of your own, please share them in the comments below. We love hearing from our viewers, and we're always on the lookout for new stories to feature. Thanks again for joining us on this journey into the unknown, and we'll see you in the next video. Remember to stay safe and keep your guard up on the internet.